Okay, guys, can you hear me and see me okay? Hopefully, you guys can hear and see okay. It seems like it has been an eternity since we've been on here. Thank you guys for bearing with me, waiting on me, and still be excited about coming back on here. I have been traveling for almost the past month solidly. It started with Well, first we took a trip up to West Virginia to visit Lori's family. Immediately, whenever we come back, there's the big hurricane evacuation. We have to get out of town immediately as soon as we get back. We end up spending 11 days on the road in Texas because of that. Come back, and I've also been in the past month, let me think, West Virginia, Texas, Alabama, uh, Louisiana, where else? Somewhere else. Oh, Joshua Tree, California, Colorado. It has been almost nonstop. And one of the things I'm finding now is, I used to hate travel. We've talked about that on here. For the first 2 years solid that I was out, we traveled nonstop all over the world. Places that people would save up for years to go to vacations on. We got to go and work there, so it didn't even cost us money. But I was in a completely devastated frame of mind back then. I was going through a nervous breakdown. I was psychologically, emotionally wounded in a lot of ways that made it impossible for me to actually take it in, to actually enjoy the experience. So I didn't really enjoy it back then, but also part of why I didn't enjoy it, that I realize now, looking back in hindsight, was because of how much I loved New York. When I discovered New York for the first time, I fell in love with that city the way that most people will only ever fall in love with another person. It, if I had to go somewhere whenever we were coming back and I would see the skyline come into view, it felt like I couldn't breathe. Like it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I could not even get a deep breath because I was so uh, overawed, overwhelmed by the level of beauty. Anytime I went anywhere, I automatically compared that place to New York. And no place is ever, places have their own unique energies, places have their own unique beauties, places have their own unique problems and issues. But for me, I always considered New York to be kind of the peak of perfection. It was the first place I'd ever felt home in my entire life. So everywhere else that I ever went, I compared to New York. I compared Seattle to New York. I compared LA to New York. I compared uh, Scottsdale, Arizona to New York. And you're not going to out New York, New York. There are no cities in the US that are going to come close to offering all the things that New York has to offer in the way that it has to offer them. It is a very, very unique city, especially in the US. Part of what makes it so unique is that it's not a US city. It's a world city. When you go to a lot of cities in the US, they're still not very well, when you go through Times Square in New York, you're going to walk through a part of town where you are going to encounter people from every single race, every single country, every single religion, every single walk of life, all simultaneously taking part in life in this one area. People that can't even speak English, that may never speak a word of English. They're just passing through on their way to somewhere else. That is a very, very unique thing in the United States. Most cities in this country, when you go to them, you may encounter people from other U.S. cities, other U.S. states, stuff like that. But it's not like in New York where it's like the entire world coming together in one place. So, and that was what I loved. That was what I compared everything else to. So everywhere I went, I was kind of miserable because I was away from the city that I loved, and I was comparing everything to it. And that's not the case anymore. Ever since we left New York, I don't feel that sense of having roots anywhere else in this country. I don't feel that sense of, being part of the fabric of a place and that place being part of the fabric of me. There's a lot of places that I love. I love being here in New Orleans. I love Salem, Massachusetts. And maybe part of me will always love New York, even if it's not the New York that exists now, if it's just the New York from the past that only lives in my memories. Part of me will probably always still love that place. But I don't feel like I have a home anymore the way I did then. So part of me would almost rather keep moving, going from place to place to place. Getting used to a place for a few days and then moving on to the next one. That is something that I've always hated. And now I actually love it, because I'm not comparing everywhere to New York anymore. First off, I don't love New York like that. So it's not always in the back of my mind, which is odd in a way, just because it was. It was like a part of me. It was always in the back of my head. I always felt it there. When I was away, I always felt energetic connections to New York and like I needed to get back. I don't feel that at all anymore. So now everywhere I go, I am able to appreciate those places for those places. I am able to appreciate the beauty of those places. I'm able to appreciate the energy that's inherent there. And I think a lot of times that's how we make ourselves miserable. We make ourselves miserable because we're constantly comparing something to something else. We make ourselves miserable because we're comparing the house we live in to the house we want to live in, or the house we live in to the house we used to live in, or, the friend we have now to the friend we had a long time ago, years ago. Whatever it is, we're always comparing things. And it's that comparing that steals a lot of joy out of stuff. So it started first going to Joshua Tree. That was the main big thing, work related, not the hurricane evacuation or anything else, just work related. Everything started off with, that's a good question, Blue Dragon. Blue Dragon 1200 says, did your connection change because you moved, or did you move because your connection changed? I think I moved because my connection changed, but I don't think I realized it all at one time. I started to, there was a time in my life when I could not have conceived of leaving New York City. It felt like such a part of me and me a part of it that I could not imagine life anywhere else. By the time I left, I would ask myself, you remember feeling this way. You remember feeling like you could not live anywhere else in this world, that this place is your home. Imagine right now what it's going to be like living day in and day out somewhere else, and really think about if you miss it. I realized very quickly that anything that I thought of about New York that I missed, it was always something from the past. It was never anything in the current era of me living there. It was always stuff like, for example, when I used to hang out at Sacred Tattoo all the time with Kevin Wilson, and I would think about things like the Christmas parties they had there, or think about just going out on Halloween Day, like, oh, October, Halloween in New York, it is amazing. Just the decorations everywhere and the people going all out, dressing up. And I would think of those things and I would realize every place I missed, every place I loved had all gone out of business without exception. Every single person that I felt a connection to had either moved or left New York or got married and settled down, or went on to other jobs. Like the crew of people that I knew that felt like home to me didn't feel like any, it was all gone. That's a very good scripture there. Yes, Sunshine says nostalgia is a trap, though. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And Oliver says no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back. Absolutely. It's like it says in the Bible, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God, meaning we're not supposed to be looking back all the time. Well, that's why I realized I was staying in New York. I was staying in New York because I was looking back all the time, looking back on things I had loved, people that I had loved, places that I loved, and it did not exist anymore. And I realized I was living almost like a ghost. Lori and I both, Lori kind of said the same thing. She said, it feels like I am not even a part of life here. Like life is just going on in the background, but I'm not connected to it. I'm not part of it. It flows on, every day. I would stand in this high rise looking out over the city every single day, seeing the sun coming up every single night, seeing the sun set, and the days would pass by so fast. Almost just like in the blink of an eye, they would go. And it felt like life was speeding past, and I wasn't even part of it. So I think I left because my connections were fading, but I didn't realize it. I didn't realize it until I started to look back in hindsight. And then once I did realize it, then that just even more reinforced the knowledge, the knowing that it's time to leave here. That, just because we have good times, just because we're surrounded by good people, just because, we have these really good events that take place around us, that doesn't mean we were supposed to stay in those places forever. It's like that scripture that says God wants to do a new thing. That's the entirety of the will of God. The will of God, WILL, the will of God is to pour more and more and more of itself into the material realm, into the dimensions of time and space. It doesn't want to do the same thing over and over and over. As a matter of fact, if it does, it begins to stagnate. It begins to deteriorate and get stuck. What divinity wants to do is constantly push forward and constantly do a new thing. You can't do a new thing if you're following the same habits and patterns every day. And that was what I realized about New York. I realized once I saw that, I realized it's time to go. Yeah, Ciro says, I would really like to leave Las Vegas. I feel it inside, something deep down, there is more. See, and that's the thing. I don't think you can say like about one place that there's nothing there for anyone, because I think every place we find ourselves because there are lessons there. We find ourselves there because there are lessons there for us to learn. There is knowledge, there is information, and there are experiences that we are meant to be wringing out of that situation that we haven't had yet. The same place may have, an infinite amount to teach you, and it may not have much to teach another person. But we're all at different places of development, and we all have strengths, and we all have weaknesses, and we all have things that we need to learn. And you'll know when you've gotten everything that you possibly can out of a place, out of a situation, when you've wrung every, last drop of knowledge out of it, you'll know, and you'll know it's time to move on. Let me see what you guys are talking about. Don't look back. That is exactly right. Third ear psychic radio. Yes. I think, there's always some value in processing your experiences and what have you, but for the most part, we're supposed to keep looking forward. Yeah. Oh, the sassy zebra print, Diana, the sassy zebra print chair. My cats have claimed that chair for their own. That is theirs. They are the only ones allowed to sit in it. So that's why it disappeared. They wanted that. So they get it. See what you guys are talking about. So it's October. We are actually deep into the harvest season now. The first of the harvest season begins with the autumn equinox, the first official day of autumn, which usually falls between September 20th and September 23rd. We've passed that. We are now going into the time of year whenever every single night from this point forward, every single night is going to get longer and longer and longer. Every single day is going to get shorter and shorter. When I was in prison, I used to meditate on this all the time. And part of the reason was because when I started to look back on my life, and at one point when I was in prison, I used to look back on it a lot. You're not constantly having new experiences in there that you're trying to process and learn from. All you have is what you experienced in the past. So you go back to it over and over and over and turn it over and over in your mind, just trying to get any little bit of psychological or emotional sustenance out of it, out of these memories that you can. And I would do that. And one of the things I realized was that every really bad thing that ever happened to me in my whole life, and every really hard, difficult thing that I ever went through, it seemed like it always happened in the summer. Always. And I didn't even realize until I started to think about it that for me, every year, beginning with the spring equinox in March, from March 20th to March 23rd, that's when we're going into that time of year, whenever from that point on, the light is going to get longer and longer every day. I didn't realize for a long time that I had this kind of creeping anxiety that would come over me when we were getting close to the spring equinox, because I did not feel safe in the summer. I did not feel safe in the time of year that traditionally the Celts said was ruled by the Oak King. They say that there are two kings that preside over the wheel of the year. There is the Oak King and there is the Holly King. The Oak King presides over the part of the year where the light is dominant, where the hours of the light are longer than the hours of the dark. When there is more light in the world than darkness, when there is more daylight than night, we are in the domain of the Oak King. When we are in the time of year, whenever night overwhelms the day, whenever there's more nighttime hours than there are daytime hours, we are in the realm of the Holly King. I realized, even if it was on only an unconscious level, once I realized that it wasn't unconscious anymore, once I realized it, I knew it. But I started to realize while I was in prison that I only felt safe whenever we reached that time of year that the Holly King presided over. I talked before about how even Santa Claus is just a re-envisioning of the Holly King tradition. Um, all of the good holiday stuff, whether you're talking about Halloween, whether you're talking about Thanksgiving, whether you're talking about, my birthday came during that time of the year, Christmas, all of this, all of the amazing things, everything that took my breath away and made life magic as a child. When I would walk down the street and see Christmas decorations, I would go into mourning as a child. When Christmas was over, the day after Christmas, I would feel like a sense of mourning and loss, because I knew that I had a whole nother part of the year to get through, that light part of the year, before I would feel safe again. When we would finally get around to the autumn equinox, when we would finally get to the part of the year where the dark was going to be stronger than the light, whenever there's going to be more hours of night than daylight, only then did I feel safe. I felt like I had finally made it into cover. I had finally made it into a safe domain. So when I was in prison, a lot of times during the part of the year whenever the light was dominant, whenever we were under the reign of the Oak King, I would do things to try to hold on to the energy of that other time of year, to hold on to the energy of the time of year whenever the Holly King is dominant. I would do anything that I could to hold that energy closer to me. And part of that was things like, I was obsessed with watching It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. This was, when I was locked up, when I was a kid. I couldn't watch it, like anytime I wanted to, just bring it up on the TV like people can now. Now, if there's something you want to watch, chances are you can probably get it on your TV at any given moment. Right now, you could probably go in there on something and bring up It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. So that, for some reason, kind of robs it of a little of its special qualities. When I was a kid and when I was in prison, if you did not see it whenever it came on TV, the night it came on TV, you didn't see it for the next year. So there was not a year that I was in prison that I missed It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, other than one year when a tornado knocked out a television antenna thing outside, something to do with the company, where they weren't able to broadcast it out. Basically an act of God, what people call it. That is the only year that I did not watch It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. I would also do things like I would get many bags of M&Ms, not many M-I-N-I, but many M-A-N-Y. It was one of the few things you could actually buy off the prison store. And I would open them up and I would take all of the brown and orange M&Ms out of the bags, because to me that felt like autumn colors. And I would put them in this clear plastic coffee jar that I had so that I could just sit and look at them. It would at least change the color scheme on of my cell a little bit, that I at least had some autumn colors in there to see. And I would do the same thing when we were getting close to Christmas, only I would use red and green, just so that I could look at red and green candy, because it made that time of year, it made the energy feel closer to me. So I mean, I think a lot of people never get into the state of mind of kind of meditating on the wheel of the year just because we're so distracted by horse shit out here. We are so distracted by, what celebrities are doing or whatever politicians are talking about or um, whatever the hell it is out here that people are obsessing over this week. All of it prevents us from really paying attention to the fact that there is a cycle happening and that we are part of this cycle. We are within this cycle, and this cycle is the wheel of the year. A lot of people don't even take a moment to acknowledge the fact that we're passing from one season into another. Doesn't mean anything to them because they're so caught up and distracted by all the things of this world. Something about meditating on the wheel of the year, especially the way, yes, Sunshine, that's a good point too. Sunshine says, and that our time is limited. Yes, that's one of the things that meditating on the wheel of the year does, is makes you realize that you only have the opportunity to go through this cycle so many times in this incarnation. That every single time, every single Halloween you experience, every single Thanksgiving you experience, every single Christmas you experience, these are very limited and rare gifts that only come around every so often. And we should really use them as mile markers in our lives. But meditating on these things takes our minds, draws our minds out of all of the useless noise that goes on in the world that people try to convince us is important, and really brings us into contemplating the passage of the year, which in turn makes us more perceptive and receptive to the energy currents that are active within the year. But there were certain books, just like there were certain television shows, like I said, I would watch The Great Pumpkin every year, or just have different colored candy to look at because it had the color scheme of the year. But there were also books. And I kind of wanted to share some of those with you guys a little bit. There are aspects of magic in them, some of them more so than others. Some are just more about like the customs and things like that of Halloween. Some of them we'll spend more time on than others. But these are books that played a huge role in my development in one way or another, or from one extent to another. One thing I want to share with you guys, and I don't have this book in yet, but one of them is actually a fictional book. I don't read very much fiction anymore. I don't read very much anything anymore just because my eyes are so bad and I'm usually so busy. I don't have a lot of time for reading. What was my point with this? But there are times whenever I did spend more time reading, I really, really loved. Even if I wasn't reading a book on magic, I still wanted to be in a world and in a universe about magic. So I would read novels that were in one way or another about practicing magicians. And some are more famous than others. Like there's the series of books about this Chicago's official wizard. His name is Harry Dresden. Those were ones I really got turned on to, but one that I kind of want to delve into a little bit with you guys, and maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't, I don't know, but it's called Alhazred. If you've ever heard of the Necronomicon is made a much bigger deal out of in magic circles than it should be. To be honest, it's a fictional novel. It comes from the work of H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft was a guy who wrote about, Cthulhu and Nyarlathotep and Abdul Al-Hazred. He wrote these stories that had a very Middle Eastern type of flavor to them. You know, they're all from the domains of like ancient Sumer and Babylon and places over there. And for a long time, one of the characters in his book, Abdul Al-Hazred, has a book called the Necronomicon. And the Necronomicon is supposed to drive people insane if they, if they read it and they're not properly prepared for it. It's like it releases kind of a worm of madness into your psyche, and you eventually go insane from it. Everybody who reads the Necronomicon goes insane. Even Abdul Al-Hazred. They called him mad because he had read it. There is no real Necronomicon. It was entirely a child of H.P. Lovecraft's imagination. But that did not stop people from getting obsessed with it. It's a very interesting story. It's a very interesting premise. It also bears a lot of similarities, some people say, to real actual books of magic, even though the Necronomicon itself is not real. As a matter of fact, you can find a book out there. Someone eventually capitalized on the fact that so many people were looking for the real Necronomicon. So many people wanted to read the Necronomicon that somebody finally cashed in on it and put something together. And the very first one was sold out of a magic shop in New York that no longer exists. It was called The Magical Child. And the man who owned this magic shop self-published the very first editions of the Necronomicon. Some say, he wrote them. Some say that someone else wrote them and he published them. But whatever it is, it was someone around in that circle that wrote this thing. Long story short, the Necronomicon ends up several years later. You can get it pretty much anywhere now. It's published by Avon. I don't know if it's the same Avon that makes the women's makeup, or if it's a different one entirely, but I have never seen another book published by Avon other than the Necronomicon. To be honest, anytime you hear people bring up the Necronomicon in a conversation in a serious way, like I invoke such and such from the Necronomicon, it's usually considered a little cringy now. That's something that would have been, people would have took more seriously, like back in the 1980s. It got popular for a brief period of time. Give me 1 second. I want to see what you guys are talking about here. I saw someone ask a question a while ago. Let me see. I saw someone say something was a heavy question, and I just wanted to see what it was, if I can find it. Let me see. Oh, Percy. Percy says, as someone who has a problem with mental health, how do you think about our limited amount of time and not get deeply depressed about it? Sorry, I know that's a heavy question. I think it comes down to shifting your focus, to be quite honest. You can either choose to focus on the fact that we only have a limited amount of time. Everything is going to come to an end, including your life. Whatever it is that you love will cease to exist one day. And you can choose to focus on that, and it could potentially make you depressed. Or you could choose to focus on the fact that our life is very short. We're only here for a very limited amount of time. Everything you love is going to cease to exist. So don't let a single second that you have to appreciate those things pass by that you don't appreciate those things. That's the difference between going through the days with a sense of gratitude and going through the days with a sense of angst. Is Do you choose to be thankful for the fact that you get to experience it here and now? Or do you choose to be angsty about the fact that it will one day come to an end? And really, that's what it comes down to. It's more about just focusing on feeling gratitude. You know, whenever I thought that I was dying, I've been really, really sick a couple of times in my life since I've been out. And whenever I thought I was dying, what it made me do was very much more appreciate the beauty in the world, appreciate the things that I got to experience, the people that I got to have around me. And whenever you're thankful, it makes it, it's hard to hold the concept of being depressed and the feeling of experiencing gratitude at the same time, I guess. My own personal 2 cents. Anyway, let me see. Yeah, that is We the People. That is a really great way of putting it. We the People says the more important your reason for living, be it the highest attainments of spirit or the service of another, your life will be as long as it needs to be so that we may fulfill our divine purpose. That is absolutely true. People, they've even found, doctors have found that people who um, come down with a fatal disease or a potentially fatal disease, say something like cancer, if they have a reason to live, they have a much, much higher chance of coming through whatever that problem is than if they just don't want to die. It's not enough to just not want to die. You have to want to live. The fact that you have something you're striving for makes you live longer. This is what Crowley was talking about. Crowley said one of the greatest mistakes that you could make is setting yourself a goal that is attainable. That if you set yourself goals that you constantly can reach further and further beyond. And I'll give you an example of what he means by that. One is like spiritual sustenance, like completing the great work. Yes, when we talk about completing the great work, you can absolutely, while you are alive in this lifetime, transcend the will of incarnation, transcend the will of samsara, break the chains which bind you to the stars and keep you incarnating into this realm over and over and over again. Yes, that is absolutely a finish line. It's not the finish line. There is no finish line to magic. There is no limit to how exalted, how high, how refined, how purified your consciousness can become. That is something you can chase forever. It's like a high that you can chase forever. You can constantly try to purify yourself more, refine yourself more, expand your consciousness. Same way with, like, say, lifting weights. There is always more improvement that you can make. There is no point that you can reach where you say, okay, this is as good as my body can possibly get. There's always other little muscles that you could focus on, different techniques you can try. There is always some way that you can improve your workout routine. These are things that, like if you just say, my goal is to reach the weight of 150 pounds. Then when you reach 150 pounds, you've achieved that goal and there's nothing else you can strive for. You want to have things in your life that you love doing and that pushes you forward, but that there is no finish line. Something that the enjoyment that you get out of the process and the experience can keep going. That will keep you alive longer than anything else in this world. The fact that you have something that you're striving for, it's living for, will make you live longer. Absolutely. Uh, one second, one second. Oh, but anyway, what I was talking about, the wheel of the year. You guys are asking some really great questions. I see more of that I'd like to get to. Uh, third ear psychic radio says in modern magic, Donald Michael Craig strongly recommends doing a divination performing a ritual for a specific manifestation to make sure the outcome will not be unfavorable. What are your thoughts on this? I think what he's talking about, what he's asking, he says in Donald Michael Craig's book, Modern Magic, he always says do a divination technique. If you're going to do magic to try to manifest something, do a divination technique first to see if it's could possibly have some sort of unfavorable outcome that you don't want, some sort of harmful outcome for you or someone else involved or something like that before you do it, something you might not necessarily see. Do I do that all the time? No, just because I always say, may it come about in a way that brings harm to none and is for the good of all, and in no way lets us reverse or bring upon me or anyone else involved a curse. I basically put in all of these little stipulations saying, if this is going to be harmful in some way, either whether it's to me or whether it's to other people, then let the energy dissipate, or whether let it go somewhere else. Let me see. Oh, but what I was going to say when I was talking about the meditating on the wheel of the year and how we're now going into Halloween, Samhain, whatever you want to call it. One of the books I had, and this is something that some of you guys may think is really great. Some of you may think, oh, that's terrible. This is one of the books that I had with me in prison, and it's written by an author that some people kind of just badmouth a lot these days, and I don't think she really deserves it. But it's a book called Halloween by Silver Ravenwolf. You may have heard of Silver Ravenwolf. She is one of the, if not the highest selling author of witchcraft, perhaps of all times. This book is not one of the greatest of hers that I would recommend if you're wanting to learn magic. And as a matter of fact, this book has a lot of the stuff in it that people critique about her that they don't like about her. And I mean, I can understand what they're talking about, why they don't like it, and maybe we'll get to little certain things of that. But at the same time, I loved this book. It's almost like a kid's book. It says spells, customs, recipes. The back of it says, witches' hats and harvest moon, ghosts that dance to haunted tune. Apple goodies, food galore, Halloween has this and more. Just where did this autumn gaiety begin? Let Silver Ravenwolf guide you through the cobwebby corners of time to uncover the history behind Halloween. Honor the spirit of this hallowed harvest holiday with Halloween magic. And what she means by Halloween magic, there's a prosperity pumpkin spell, a corn husk dolly, a solitary harvest moon ritual. So if you are by yourself, if you don't have anyone to practice magic with, this has a solitary harvest moon ritual that you can do just by yourself to mark the occasion, mark the holiday. The reason that's good, the reason it marks the holiday is because, well, it's like when you're learning to do we always talk about how there's the path of the sword and the path of the serpent. Like the path of the sword is how the energy moves down the tree of life when it's going to manifest, and the path of the serpent is how the energy moves up the tree whenever it's returning to source. Well, whenever you first learn the path of lightning, where it's sort of like the middle pillar, only you're using 10 spheres instead of 5. You're using all 10 spheres on the tree of life. Whenever you first learn that, you're supposed to do it every day. And then later on down the road, you'll get to a point where you only need to do it once a week, maybe once a month, later on down the road from that. But ultimately, after you've done it enough times, you'll only need to do it 4 times a year. You do it at the equinoxes and you do it at the solstices for spiritual sustenance. And the reason you're doing it then is because you are energetically aligning yourself, energetically aligning your energy system, your psyche, your consciousness with the energy currents that are going on in the world. Same way with doing something like this, like a solitary harvest moon ritual, a solitary Halloween ritual, however you want to think of it. You are doing something that will more closely align you to the energetic currents that are moving through the world. Oliver says, what grade is that ritual? Oh, you're talking about what grade is the Path of the Sword ritual? I can't remember. I can't remember exactly where you even begin doing the middle pillar, which grade you're in. I can't remember exactly. It's somewhere below Tippereth. I remember that. Oh, so there's that, the Halloween magic. She says magical goodies: candied love apples, witch's brew, sugar snakes in graveyard dust. Now this might sound kind of stupid to y'all out here, thinking about things like this, like candied apples and witch's brew to drink and the sugar snakes treats. When you're out here and you have access to everything in the world and you can just turn on Netflix and watch horror movies and scary movies all October long and just, have snacks from Whole Foods or Amazon or whatever delivered to your house, things like this probably don't mean as much. But when I was in prison, I used to go over stuff like this in my head over and over and over all the time. Like I would think, if and when the day ever comes and I'm out of here, I'm going to do this all the time. I am going to, throughout the whole wheel of the year, all stops as we get close to him, I'm going to celebrate and mark each point of this year by cooking treats that correspond in some way with the energy. Like in this case, it's Halloween themed treats. Or Halloween themed drinks. I would think I want to decorate my house with those kinds of with those decorations, just stuff that keeps me in the frame of mind and focused on this energy current through the wheel of the year. I wanted to feel it as much as I possibly could. I wanted to make these snacks. I wanted to do these rituals, just anything I could to bind myself more tightly and closely to the cycle of the year, because it also represented to me a time when life was more pure and life was easier. When you were a kid and you got so excited at the fact that you were going to go out and go trick-or-treating or get to open presents on Christmas, or, just seeing the decorations in the air, how excited you would get about that stuff. And I used to think, I don't ever want to lose that. Yes. Blue Dragon says, sounds like she is speaking to young teens. I respect that she is talking to them. Those years can be pretty lonely for some. That's exactly what it is. She writes in a way, she's not considered a serious writer because she writes in a way for teenagers where teenagers can understand. But that doesn't mean that there's not really great stuff in here. There is, and we're going to go into some of that. She also talks about divination. She says circle of ashes and stones, magic mirrors, apple, pumpkin seed, and water divination. There's also rituals to honor the dead. The Dumb Supper, Samhain Fire, Soul Lights, Spirit Rattles, and Spirit Bowls. So we're going to be looking at this. I don't know if you guys are going to like it or not. We'll see whenever we get to going how into it you are, because this was a book that, as crazy as this sounds, this was one of the books that helped save my sanity when I was on death row. So there's a lot to be gained from there. The other thing, the other book we're going to be going into is, and this is another one that is a really great, it is a great magic book in general. It's one I don't recommend to people a lot of times in the beginning just because of the name can turn people off. But names turn people off all the time. A lot of people get turned off when they come to magic and they hear me talking about, going on and on about angels. And they're thinking, I came to magic to get away from angels. I came to magic to get away from Christianity and Judaism. I don't want to hear about that stuff. So, some people feel that way about that particular language. Other people, and this is something that I myself am even kind of guilty of, is I don't like, anything to do with like witchy stuff. It's hard to describe, but it's like super, super popular. It's almost like people have taken spirituality and they're using it almost like a fashion accessory. That's kind of what I think of when I think of witchcraft now, and witches in general. And I know that's not fair. I know that all of them aren't like that. I know there are serious practitioners within those realms. People that have a lot of valuable information and experience and everything else, but that's just my own personal feelings whenever I start hearing the word, witch and witchcraft and all that sort of stuff. The Instagram witchy stuff. Yeah, the Insta witches. Yeah. Always, it's one of those things I always tell people there's more to a spiritual practice than just liking witchy pictures on Instagram. And now a lot of times when people think of witchcraft, that's one of the things they think of. The reason I'm bringing this up is saying sometimes you have to put aside those prejudices. And that's what those things are. If you don't want anything to do with ceremonial magic because you're here and talk about angels and Hebrew names of God, then you're not going to be able to get anything out of that if you can't set aside your own preconceived notions and preconceived prejudices to get all of the amazing fruit out of that tradition. Same way with the witchcraft stuff. If you can't, let go of the fact that feels cheesy to you, then you're going to miss out on a lot of really great stuff, because there is a lot of really great things to learn in those traditions. Same way with this one. This is a book that a lot of people cringe hard just because of the name. It's called The Psychic Vampire Codex, and it's by Michel Belanger, spelled Belanger. It's called A Manual of Magic and Energy Work. This book, no exaggeration, I have probably owned between 20 and 30 copies of this book. I buy them and give them to anyone who seems even remotely serious about magic, doing magic in a practical way, because this is one of those books, just like there are some people that's going to think, I don't want to hear about vampirism or whatever it is. For every person like that, there's going to be someone that whenever they go into this stuff, something about this work ignites something in them and they get excited. This turns people on to entire other different aspects of magic. Magic you can do that doesn't require 2 or 3 hour long rituals, that you're using just your own energy to do. And this is actually written by a friend of mine. She came and stayed with me for a week one time whenever I was in Salem. And honestly, my conversations with her, our time together, uh, was one of the funnest periods of time, one of the most enjoyable periods of time for me since I've been out of prison. Um, but we're going to tie it into. I brought it up just because it's written in a slightly spooky way, because it's about vampires. What she's trying to do in this book, and once again, I'm saying give this a chance. Don't let it turn you off, because if you you will miss something great if you let the whole vampire thing turn you off of this book. This book is amazing when it comes to actual energy work, doing energy work. And that's one of the reasons I brought it up. One, it ties into the whole October thing, this time of year, because we're talking about psychic vampires. The other thing is it ties very much into a book. This is a thin little book that we've spent quite a bit of time going over, just because it is absolutely incredible for doing energy work, magic on the go again. And that's why I like the fiction books, because they're about wizards or magicians, or people who do magic, are doing magic on the go in the middle of like adventures, real life adventures. So I thought we'll go into maybe even some of those books. If you guys want to bear with me through some fiction, I will even read to you bits and pieces, and I'll give you an example of what I mean. Here's one right here. This is by Stephen Blackmore. This one is called Bottle Demon, and it's part of a series of novels about a necromancer in LA. Let me read the back to you real quick. After being attacked by a demon in the one place he thought he was safe, Eric Carter has been killed, his soul sent to take its place as a stand-in for the Aztec god of death. But somebody on Earth isn't done with him yet. Somebody with the power to bring him back from the dead. He doesn't know who, and worse, he doesn't know why. Between an angry death goddess, family secrets steeped in blood, a djinn who's biding his time, and a killer mage who can create copy after copy of himself, Eric's new life looks to be just as violent as his last one. But if he doesn't get to the bottom of why he's back, it's going to be a hell of a lot shorter. So this, once again, may not be your cup of tea, may not be a thing you like, but when I can read about an adventure story written by people who have done research, at least done research into magic, so that they can, write about it in a way where it inspires you and makes you want to practice more. And these sorts of books are things that did that for me. So if you want to read, Kira's asking what book is this? This is one called Bottle Demon, and this is actually the third in this series. It's a series about a necromancer named Eric Carter, and it's by a man named Stephen Blackmore. But this is the third one, I believe, in this series. But anyway, we've been going through our subtle energy book and talking about different practices and stuff in here. And I was talking about how some of these practices are very, very universal. Things like grounding, things like centering, things like projecting energy, things like being able to pull energy in and receive energy, all that kind of stuff. This is stuff that transcends borders, boundaries, genres, whatever you want to call them. This is stuff you use whether you're doing witchcraft, whether you're doing ceremonial magic, whether you're doing, healing techniques like Reiki, or even whether you're doing psychic vampirism, whatever name you want to put on it. So that's what we're going to be getting into in the month of October. I wanted to read some stuff out of here, get started actually tonight, going into these two, just talking about the bridge between, that's why I called this particular episode Wards and Constructs. But I'm going to save these. I'm not going to get started. But something else that was just on my mind to talk to you guys about tonight, just kind of getting caught up, doing general housekeeping, that sort of thing. I'm going to be here a lot more in October. I had to travel all over the place in September. I'm going to be here a lot more. We're going to be doing this a lot more. We're going to be getting back into practices. We're going to be getting back into Halloween stuff. We're going to even try a little bit of fiction and see how that goes. If you guys like that, magical fiction. So I'm going to be here a lot more. But one of the things when I was in Colorado, I was doing a film shoot for a series that's being put together right now on modern mystics. And one thing that occurred to me is I really someone said asked me, we're doing an interview. It's an interview format thing, and someone asked me something about being a teacher. Something, yeah, being a teacher. I can't even remember exactly what the question was, how it was phrased, but something that just hit me really hard right then, and something that I've been kind of coming to terms with and looking at is how I do not want to be looked at as a teacher. I do not want that label to be put on me. It's not a label that I'm comfortable with. And part of that is like Jesus said that not everyone is meant to be a teacher. He said when you're a teacher, the world will hold you to a higher standard than it does other people. Some people do that because you're like an inspiration to them. Other people do that just because they want to take you down a notch. If they think you're putting yourself above everyone. It's like in New Zealand, they call it the tall poppy syndrome. It's because when you see a field of poppies grow, if one poppy grows above the rest, they say they want to knock the head off of it. They don't want one rising above the other. And some people even feel that way, about teachers or what have you. But Beekeeper, that's right. Beekeeper says, my friend says all our teachers are just dudes on a trip like us, and not to put them on a pedestal. Yeah, exactly right. That's exactly my point. That's what I was kind of getting at, is how I don't think of myself as a teacher, and it makes me a little bit uncomfortable having that label applied to me. So they said, well, what are you then? If you don't call yourself a teacher, what label would you put on yourself? And I said, I would call myself a guy who figured out some things and had a lot of really great experiences, and who is trying to the best of his ability to create a record of those experiences so that other people who may come across it and be interested can replicate or duplicate those experiences. I am someone who is making a record of their experiences so that those who may choose to do so can try to replicate or duplicate them. And that's it. That was just something that kind of stuck in my head lately. And I'm not even sure why. But I did want to bring that up. Just because that's kind of a pedestal that I am uncomfortable with being put on. So thanks, guys. Yeah. Okay, so whenever we start back, like I said, I'm going to be here a lot more often in October. So I think we're going to be back on here in a couple of days, and we will pick up with the Psychic Vampire Codex, comparing it to the energy workbook we've been working with, and getting into some of Silver Ravenwolf's Halloween stuff, just for the sake of nostalgia and just allowing ourselves to enjoy the season. That's what this is all about. Reading these Halloween books, going into some of these fictional things, it's about just enjoying this time of year, when I know it's not only me. I know a lot of people who are drawn to magic also have an affinity for this time period during the year. So we're just going to try to enjoy that a little bit. That's why we're here. We're here to love and be loved, and to try to enjoy ourselves as long as we're here doing it. So that's what we're going to start on in a couple of days. I love you guys. Also, start keeping track of your questions. Write down questions you want to talk about. Topics that you want just in the course of when we're doing this stuff. If I see a good one come up over the screen, we'll go into that a little bit too. Keep track of those. Okay, guys, I love you. Thank you so much for sticking with me through the years that we've been on here. And I'll talk to you again in a couple of days. Take care.